This is Fort Smith, Arkansas, a town of 70,000 on the state's western border, directly across the Arkansas River from Oklahoma. It's a proud community, not unlike scores of others across this land. They still wave Old Glory down at the courthouse, and high school football is the roughest game in town. The FBI ranks this city as one of the 50 safest in the country. But there was a time when Fort Smith was as rough and wild as any settlement in the Old West. Famous bandits, including the Dalton Gang and the pistol-packing, hard-drinking Bell Star, rode roughshod in and around these parts until a man known as the Hanging Judge moved to town, bringing justice to one of the most lawless regions the nation has known. A dungeon-like jail and the threat of a hangman's noose were the cures Judge Isaac Parker prescribed to arrest crime during the late 1800s. Parker and his brave deputies carved a special place in history for a town outlaws nicknamed Hell on the Border.
I sentence you to hang by the neck until you're dead. May God, whose laws you have broken, and before whose tribunal you must then stand, have mercy on your soul.
Long before recorded history, Osage Indians hunted buffalo on virgin land surrounding the confluence of the Poteau and Arkansas rivers. A 35-foot bluff towered above the place where the waters met, a spot French trappers would later name Belle Point. In the early 1800s, white settlers began to arrive, along with Cherokees, who were pressured and pushed westward from ancestral land in the southeast. The Osage considered this infringement on their native hunting grounds, and the two tribes began to war. News of violence reached Military Commander General Thomas Smith in St. Louis, who ordered the establishment of a fortress to maintain peace among the Indians and pioneers. On Christmas Day, 1817, a command of 64 landed at Belle Point and pitched a camp they named in honor of General Smith. General Smith would soon give title to a city that would spring up around the primitive stone and log stockade. The fort itself remained less than 8 years. A treaty was negotiated between the Osage and Cherokee in 1822, reconciling most of the problems between the tribes. 2 years later, the fort was abandoned. At about the time the military was pulling out, steamboats began traveling up the Arkansas River to Fort Smith. The community boomed, since steamers could safely venture no farther north. In the early 1830s, during the administration of President Andrew Jackson, Fort Smith served as the final encampment for the government-ordered transfer of 5 civilized Indian tribes from the east into Indian country, now the state of Oklahoma. Chickasaws, Creeks, Seminoles, Choctaws, and Cherokees were transferred by wagon train and steamship to Fort Smith and then across the river. Many died along the Trail of Tears, one of the greatest tragedies in the annals of American history. With so many Indian tribes living across the state line, community leaders led by entrepreneur John Rogers petitioned the government to build a new fort near the ruins of the first. Washington obliged, paid Rogers $15,000 for about 300 acres, and in 1838 began building a stone garrison for defense against Indian uprisings. During construction of the new fort, the commanding officer was Colonel Zachary Taylor, who would later become the nation's 12th president. Taylor soon realized there was no danger from the Indians and convinced the government to stop building on the fort before work was finished. The War Department modified the original plans and turned the fort into a supply depot for posts on the western frontier. Fort Smith soon became known as the gateway to the Southwest. Military troops poured through town on their way west. They were followed by gold seekers who'd heard about a strike at Sutter's Mill in California. The Memphis and St. Louis routes of the Butterfield Overland Stagecoach Line met at Fort Smith and then continued west along dusty trails. Fort Smith was a jumping-off place, the last chance to buy liquor before entering Indian country. But not everyone simply passed through. Some settlers stayed, opening stores, hotels, saloons. while others began growing cotton, the staple of the antebellum South. Fadjo Craven's family came here in the 1830s. His great-grandfather established one of the first banks, and Cravens takes pride in bragging on the historical significance of his hometown.
Fort Smith was a much more important historical place than it has ever been given recognition for. Fort Smith has now sort of renewed its pride in its history, and it's beginning to show it. I'm very glad for that.
In 1861, Arkansas seceded from the Union. Federal troops abandoned the fort, and for 2 years, the garrison was under command of the Confederacy. But in 1863, federal troops stormed the fort, and the stars and stripes once again waved over Bell Point. On April 10th, 1865, a telegram arrived with news of the surrender of General Robert E. Lee in Virginia. The war was over. But the most colorful era in Fort Smith history was just beginning. By 1871, the Indian frontier had moved so far west of the Arkansas border that Fort Smith could no longer serve efficiently as a military supply depot. So again, the Army moved out. 1 year later, the federal court for the Western District of Arkansas moved in with criminal jurisdiction over Indian territory. Indians were subject to their own tribal courts, but this did not apply to whites living in Indian country, and there were no laws of extradition. Horse thieves, bank robbers, even killers hid in the Kiamichi Mountains west of Fort Smith with no threat from local law officers. Graft and corruption plagued the court for several years. Crime went unchecked, and while court costs were high, relatively few cases were tried. But that was to change when President U.S. Grant appointed a former congressman from Missouri to preside over the court in 1875. His name was Isaac C. Parker, and he was to become one of the most legendary figures in American judicial history. Only 36 years old when he took the job, Parker soon realized he had accepted one of the most difficult offices in the country. He set up chambers in the old commissary building and prepared to start his bench duties inside the former military barracks. In his first term of court, Parker set the tone for a 21-year reign of terror for the outlaw. He sentenced 8 convicted murderers to die on the gallows. Before hanging day, one of the condemned was shot trying to escape, and another sentence was commuted. But on September 3rd, 1875, 6 men died on the Fort Smith gallows, nicknamed the government suspender. Word of the event spread far and wide. Eastern newspapers would soon begin calling Parker the hanging judge. One of Parker's first moves was the appointment of 200 deputy marshals to travel into Indian territory and, dead or alive, bring back wanted criminals to the Fort Smith jail. Deputies including Heck Thomas and W.P. Pitcock were brave gunslingers who worked for pitiful wages. An outlaw brought to jail was worth $2. If a deputy could get his prisoner to Fort Smith alive, he would be paid 6 cents a mile for his travels. If the outlaw was slain, the deputy forfeited all expense money. One of the most dangerous desperados tracked by marshals was a whiskey-peddling killer named Ned Christie. After several gunfights, officers finally used dynamite to blow Christie out of his log hideout. Christie's body was pulled back to Fort Smith, where deputies propped him up and proudly had their picture taken, standing alongside the dead outlaw. In 1969, a motion picture entitled True Grit featured a grisly marshal from Fort Smith named Brewster Cogburn, portrayed by John Wayne. Cogburn was purely fictional, but he has become more famous than any of the deputies who were actually employed by the hanging judge. For more than 20 years, Guy Nichols has worked at the Fort Smith National Historic Site, which once housed the Parker Court. He's perhaps the most knowledgeable authority on the men who rode for Parker.
Some of them, if they hadn't been a deputy, they would have probably been an outlaw. because these people were rugged. It took rugged men to do the job. If you sent the most moral individual that you could find into the Indian country as a deputy marshal to try to bring out the outlaw, that man wouldn't return. Somebody would kill him.
Heard some?
Maybe.
Horse?
Don't know. Something.
How'd it track us?
Could be Parker's men.
Caleb Watson! You boys just come on out now. Judge Parker's got an invitation to have supper with you.
Damn. He'll see me in hell!
Indeed, often there was a thin line between outlaw and lawman.
Looks like Judge Parker's gonna have another party.
Two of Parker's former deputies, Gratt and Bob Dalton, formed a gang and ravaged the Southwest as murderous robbers. The Daltons met their fate trying to rob two banks simultaneously in broad daylight at Coffeyville, Kansas. 4 members of the gang were gunned down in a bloody 10-minute shootout that also left 4 citizens dead. Over 100 deputy marshals and posse men were killed in the line of duty while working for Judge Parker. But these men helped bring to justice many of the most evil criminals the country has known. Deputy Heck Thomas once rode into Fort Smith with 32 prisoners, 9 of whom were accused killers. Outlaws began to refer to Fort Smith as hell on the border, for if they were caught, their destination was a hellhole of a jail located in the cellar of the federal courthouse. Few dungeons of the Dark Ages could equal this chronically damp prison. The cells were crowded with as many as 200 prisoners without regard to age, health, or crime. Innocent youths mingled with hardened criminals. Parker made repeated pleas to Washington for a better facility, but 12 years went by before the government agreed to build a new jail wing onto the courthouse. Of the men that served time in this jail, 160 were convicted of murder and rape and sentenced by Isaac Parker to die on the gallows. Of those condemned, 79 were actually hanged. During Parker's first 14 years on the bench, there was no appeal process. A convicted felon's only hope was a presidential pardon.
Okay, this is just one of those things we have to deal with.
Order in the court. You attorneys, sit down, please.
Your Honor, I move for a mistrial. These men are...
Judge, these men are just scum of the earth. Plain, dirty dogs.
Enough, enough. You have heard the verdict of this honorable jury. Will the defendants please rise? Do you have anything to say for yourselves?
No, sir. I just come here to die, not make a speech.
You men have been found guilty of horrible crimes. This court has but one maxim: equal and exact justice. May God, whose laws you have broken and before whose tribunal you must now stand, have mercy on your souls.
Hanging Day at Fort Smith attracted a carnival atmosphere. People would pack the town, especially when cold-blooded killers like Cherokee Bill were to be executed. Executions got to be so popular that Parker had erected 4 high walls around the gallows. Only law officers, ministers, and family of the condemned were issued tickets to come inside the fence. And in all his years in Fort Smith, Judge Parker never attended a hanging. Multiple hangings were not uncommon. The 5-man Buck gang died together when executioner George Maladon pulled the lever on a trapdoor. Known as the Prince of Hangmen, Maladon was a well-known figure about Fort Smith. It's been written that Maladon walked to work on hanging day carrying a basket of rope woven with pitch to prevent slippage.
This court is adjourned.
In September 1896, the federal court at Fort Smith lost its jurisdiction over the Indian Territory. Congress apparently felt it could no longer stand for a court system that had become famous for its high number of executions. But despite his reputation, Isaac Parker, in personality, was not a cruel man. A Fort Smith civic leader, Parker often quoted scripture from the bench and at times wept upon pronouncing the death sentence. Near the end of his career, St. Louis Republic newspaper reporter Ada Patterson was sent to interview Parker. She was surprised to discover a warm gentleman who did not live up to his harsh legend.
He is the gentlest of men, this alleged sternest of judges. He is courtly of manner and kind of voice and face. The man who has passed the death sentence upon more criminals than has any other judge in the land. The features that have in them the horror of the Medusa to desperados are benevolent to all other humankind.
On November 17, 1896, Judge Isaac Parker died. At his request, Parker's grave in the Fort Smith National Cemetery is marked only by an unadorned headstone. Parker had long suffered from Bright's disease, but his doctor said death was caused by 21 years of overwork. Today, his restored courtroom is a national monument to a man some historians have called the greatest judge in the history of the American Wild West.
I never hanged a man. It was the law.
In the late 1800s, Fort Smith was the favorite watering hole for a woman known as the petticoat terror of the plains. Belle Starr has been immortalized by Hollywood as a beautiful and glamorous bandit queen. In reality, Belle was a homely horse thief who could drink most men under the table and changed husbands with the passing of seasons.
A few years ago, a little lady came in, and the first thing she told me was that she had seen Belle Starr many times. So I asked her, was Belle Starr really a beautiful woman? And she said Belle Starr was as homely as a mud fence. So then I asked her, how come all these stories that Belle's a beautiful woman? She said, according to the same stories, Belle was the only woman that went into the saloons and drank with the men in the 1870s and 80s. She punched me in the ribs with her bony little elbow and said, son, let's face it, even today, one woman in a saloon full of drunk men, naturally, she's a beautiful woman.
Belle Starr's daughter, Pearl, was a well-known madam in Fort Smith in the early 1900s. She ran a house of prostitution on Front Street alongside 8 other brothels townsfolk referred to as the Row. Most of the houses were destroyed by a raging fire in 1911, but this one survived. Built in 1898 by an attractive madam named Laura Ziegler, Miss Laura's social club entertained many prominent locals with song and dance and other pleasures. Pat Bissell is writing a book about the turn-of-the-century Fort Smith red light district. Her research indicates that Miss Laura's was the town's palace of prostitution.
This was the fanciest house of prostitution between Kansas City and Dallas. And I would be happy to dispute that with anybody.
Miss Laura's social club has been splendidly restored and is again open for business, more respectably, as a restaurant. A spirit of revitalization seems to be sweeping the historic quarters of Fort Smith. Many of the city's most elegant Victorian homes are being restored to the way they must have appeared in the time of Judge Parker. Now open for tours, this stately home once belonged to Parker's prosecuting attorney, William Henry Harrison Clayton.
As we walk into the gentleman's parlor, I guess it would be appropriate at this time to give a brief history of the Clayton family. William Henry Harrison Clayton was the district attorney for Judge Parker's court from 1874 until 1897.
Dr. Art Martin and son Bradley have taken on one of the most ambitious projects, directing efforts to restore a couple of electric-powered streetcars. When work is finished, the cars will be turned into moving museums, traveling back and forth from a depot to the old Fort Museum across the street from Parker's Court and restored gallows.
Streetcars actually began in 1883 with horse-drawn cars, and for about 10 years that's all they had. But then in 1893 they began to get electric cars, and as the electric car lines extended, the city extended along the line of the streetcar, because at one time they sold 20 million fares in Fort Smith. Now everybody had to ride it 3 or 4 times a day to get that much paid fares in 1 year, because that's the only way they had to go.
People come look at Judge Parker's courtroom, they look at the gallows, they walk out by the river, they get back in their car and they go across the bridge. If we can get them on the streetcar and get them in the old Fort Museum, and they'll spend some time there, then they're going to have to eat lunch because they've been here that long. And I hope that because we'll also, if our route works out as we've been trying to, we'll go by the National Cemetery, people will go see the National Cemetery. The longer we can keep them in Fort Smith, the better off Fort Smith is, because they'll maybe even spend the night.
The hanging judge and his court are the town's greatest tourist draw, but they are by no means the city's only claim to notoriety. Fort Smith is the birthplace of jazz musician Al Trent, and the home and final resting place of William O. Darby, a World War II hero who fought and died for his country. Fort Smith is also the home of Fort Chaffee, an Army base where Elvis Presley took basic training and received his famous haircut, and the camp where Vietnamese and Cuban refugees lived before being relocated throughout the country. Some of the refugees that came to Chaffee settled in this area, not unlike the pioneers of the early 1800s on their way west who decided to homestead here. Throughout its history, this has been the story of Fort Smith, a jumping-off place for early settlers and 20th century refugees, a uniquely Western town in the middle of the country. Bob Browning manages a television station that occupies ground where Judge Isaac Parker's home once stood. He came here from Texas more than a decade ago and has found Fort Smith to be a special place, proud of its heritage, but yet not boastful of the sordid events that occurred here during the hell-on-the-border days.
Throughout all of history, the entire history of Fort Smith, there has been a melting pot attitude about this community, as it would be for any jumping-off point. In the earlier days, you had a number of ethnic groups that immigrated through this area. Many settled, so there is a richness of heritage from many ethnic groups in Fort Smith. The community, of course, has a frontier heritage and a frontier attitude, and that survives even to this day. But it's an attitude not built on Judge Parker's gallows or packing guns and chasing outlaws. It's an attitude of independence. And that attitude of independence is what allows Fort Smith to move forward as it goes through the 1980s.